Hello and welcome to the morning edition of the CBB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. It is a busy morning trying to put out some tournament previews for the conferences. My day job has something come up that I've got to get into and deal with, and I am just trying to build my own lineups and get all prepared here as well. A ton going on. It's a busy time of year, of course. So we're going to try and be as efficient as possible here. And I'm going to quickly run through the, primary focus on the 5-game main slate. The 3-game, early slate is happening here in just about an hour. So probably not a ton for me to talk about there as far as on-demand watches for the show by the time people get around to it. They're just going to be focused on the night slate / main. So let me just throw out a couple of plays for this one coming up here in the next, 35 to 40 minutes here. I'm going to have to forego my usual intro as well. I am super strapped for time and super stressed out, so I am apologetic for that. But it's the ACC first round, opening round games, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville versus BC, Notre Dame versus Virginia Tech. The first thing you want to do for building with this slate is the following. You want to target against Notre Dame's zone. Every time Syracuse has been on the slate, we're always targeting against them. Their zone is not the same as Notre Dame's variation, but it's definitely got some similarities. And the way that Virginia Tech is going to be able to pick it apart and dismantle it should be similar to the way that they did against Syracuse. That means Justin Mutz, despite being 9.4, and Grant Basile, despite being 8.7K, are both priority plays on the slate for me. I'm not actually expecting them to be that highly rostered either. It's a short slate. I think people are going to spend their money on the L. Ellises of the world, the Javon Franklins. Good options, definitely. But me, I'm going to do what I know, and that's targeting against zone defenses with this Virginia Tech Hokie squad. That means Justin Mutz is worth the pay up. Last time he played Notre Dame, he scored 46 fantasy points, 19, 8, and 9, flirted with a triple-double. I expect him to do similar things here today. And Grant Basile, same type of thing, 8.7K. He had 43 fantasy points, 33 and 7 against Notre Dame. Both of those guys are going to absolutely destroy. So those are your pay up priorities for me, at least. If you want to follow me on that, you know how successful we've been targeting against zone defenses. There is value on this Virginia Tech team. Rodney Rice at 3.9, healthy, played 20 minutes against FSU, scored almost 20 fantasy points. MJ Collins at 3.4, playing big minutes. So you have some cheapies for this Virginia Tech team that you could definitely look at, target, and use. Other values with Quentin Post of BC, being sick. Now he's hurt. All these issues coming up. TJ Bickerstaff comes back into our life. He's 4.2K. He's probably one of the better values on the slate, assuming that Post remains out. 4.2K, big minutes, yes. Marcus Hammond at 5.2 for Notre Dame. He's still cheap enough to be considered a value. You can plug him in. If Post is out, you have Devin McLaughlin from BC at 5K as well. Pretty big fouler at times. Minutes are erratic, but he is a very strong option if Post ends up out. One of the favorite players for me on the slate, that's not the Virginia Tech guys that I think will be loaned, is going to be Lance Terry of Georgia Tech. With the field probably paying up for Javon Franklin, and I'm going with Basile Mutz. That means the natural leverage, in addition to those guys, is going to a lesser owned option on the Tech or on Georgia Tech, like Lance Terry, who has been really, really good lately. He has, Franklin's getting all the hub, but Terry, over his last few games here, pulling it up, he scored 29 plus fantasy points in 3 straight, 27 plus in 4 of his last 5. So Lance Terry playing very, very good. 6.4 is a reasonable price for him. So to wrap up that slate quickly, my core is going to be the double stack of Virginia Tech with Grant Basile and Justin Mutz. It has worked for us so many times before. I'm going to go right back to it. And then the third member of the core, it's going to be Marcus Hammond at 5.2. But with the Post news, if he ends up being out, Bickerstaff, McLaughlin options you could use. I like a little bit of Mike James from Louisville as well. I think he's a pretty decent option. And if you're making some additional lineups, you got to throw some Baba Miller out there because you just never know when he's going to break out here. Got to get some film on there for his NBA draft, tape. And I think that he's a decent enough option there in deep field GPP. All right, let's move on to the other slate here. And I'm going to try and be efficient on this one as well. I'm going to go game by game as usual. So bear with me here as we burn through this. But this is a nice one. It has some teams such as Fairleigh Dickinson versus Merrimack. They are not eligible for the tournament because of their status from coming up as a lower division. So that's unfortunate because they have been a very, very good team, but we'll talk about them here in a second. Northern Kentucky, who pulled off the win against Youngstown versus Cleveland State. UNC Wilmington and Charleston. North Dakota State and Oral Roberts. So we have some mid-majors here again. And then, of course, the WCC final between Gonzaga and St. Mary's. So we have a plethora of different options here. We have to anticipate guys like what happened last night, the Gonzaga game, carrying a lot of ownership. People gravitated towards that. I do expect that to happen again. On the Fairleigh Dickinson Merrimack side, let's go into what they run as a starting lineup, and then we'll work back from there. Yeah, this is going to be the day from hell. All right, so Fairleigh Dickinson, really trash defense, 361st in defensive efficiency, but they have pulled off back-to-back wins over the St. Francis schools here in the Northeast Conference. Surprisingly enough, that they're kind of free rolling here because, you know, a Merrimack loss or a Merrimack win or loss means the different team is going into the tournament. So their starting group that they typically run with is the following: Grant Singleton, Ansley Alamanor, Dimitri Roberts, Joe Moondin, and Sean Moore. They do run a relatively, not a deep rotation necessarily, but they do have some key bench pieces, 3 to 4 guys who typically play 10 to 15 minutes, which is enough to keep the starters, you know, below that 35-minute threshold. The best rates that you want to look at here, Dimitri Roberts he is one of the few that is playing the most minutes, with everybody else kind of seeing their top end upside hurting a little bit. Roberts playing 87% of the minutes, 25% usage rate, 33% three-point shooter, 22% assist rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40. So Dimitri Roberts has some pretty nice rates there, but he is priced at 8.8. You're paying an extremely high price for him against Merrimack. Just making it out there that, you know, he's priced that way for a reason. It's a very difficult price to get to, clearly, but you know that in a game like this, he's going to be the one that has the ball in his hands and he's going to take a ton of shots. It's just probably a little bit too high. He's one of those more so, I guess, GPP alt type of play. Sean Moore, 6'1", Ansley Elmore is 7'1", Grant Singleton 8'6". So we're looking at some really expensive starters here for this team. And then Joe Moondin is the other starter sitting there at 4-1. So for some reason, we've got 4 starters who are priced way up, and then we've got Moondin, the other starter, who is priced way down. That means that Moondin is probably going to see a big ownership spike here. He has played in 2 of his last 3 games over 20 minutes. He was 18th just a few games ago, the regular season. He's typically right around 18 to 20 fantasy points. Very strong option at the 4-1. Going to take a fair amount of shots. Looking at his rates, he has a shot rate over 24%, a usage rate of 24%, defensive rebounding rate of 21%, which is pretty strong for a kid that's 6'3" and playing a lot on the perimeter, draws over 4 fouls per 40, shoots 34% from long range, also getting called for 4.2 fouls per 40. So he is the guy to definitely look at here for the Knights when you're considering your different options. Ansley at 7-1, I think, has some main team viability because of his high floor, and I think Singleton at 8.6 is just blatantly overpriced. So I don't even look at him. Like I said, Roberts I like for some GPP stuff, but Singleton is one I'm just crossing off the list. Almanor, I think, is definitely main team viable. We know Moondin's going to be a popular play, and Sean Moore is somewhat of a sneakier GPP option at 6-1. He has flashed some upside in this tournament, and he's seen his shot rate spike in this tournament as well. If that continues at 6-1, he could be one of the sneakier options on the slate. For the Merrimack squad here, they have, DK really came out swinging for the fences on some of these prices. We've got some expensive stuff here for the Warriors, who, by the way, have the nation's 6th longest winning streak here. They've been, they haven't lost since January 28th. Wins in this tournament over LIU and over Sacred Heart, and both were fairly dominant victories. Rates-wise here, Jordan Minor leads the team in usage at 32%. It has a 30% shot rate, 32% combined rebounding rate, 20% assist rate. Also, 2.7% steal rate and an 8.5% block rate, drawing almost 7 fouls per 40. Jordan Minor is a terror all over the court. He's not even super tall. He is just a guy that is super athletic and dominates this particular league. He is somebody that we're obviously going to want to look at here for this Merrimack squad. And this Merrimack squad, they play angry because they're not eligible for the tournament just yet. Now, you're going to have to pay a steep price for him at 8-9, but his 8-9 is much more realistic, much more favorable, and I'm much more comfortable paying it than I am for the two Fairleigh Dickinson guys who are around the same price as him. And that is pretty obvious. You haven't watched any Merrimack games. I know that, and that's fine. But if you go into the logs and look, you'll see he's spiked throughout the season in this conference. Huge upside, 40 plus fantasy points. He's got a couple 64s. He's got some 40s, 35s, 46, 44, just consistently. Back in December against these FDU boys, he had 19 points and 10 rebounds, 43 fantasy points. And then in the most recent game against them, which was back on the 28th of January, he had 15 points, 11 rebounds for 38 fantasy points. So he is going to do some damage here. If you can fit him into your lineup, and that decision is going to be the field going Drew Timme again, we know it, going Drew Timme or going with a guy like this. And last night got a little rough. It was like 2v2 across the board. It was crazy. Everybody had the same 6 players, and then it was just the 2v2 versus all, which got really weird. And we might see something similar to that on this slate. And it wasn't as if, you know, our Posh play did bad yesterday with Adrian Nelson. He had a horrible first half where he was in foul trouble, but he ended up with 17 and 13. It was just the underperformances overall of some of those Horizon games, which did definitely hurt us to a degree, but I know a lot of you ended up being fine. So with that margin of error being very low here with a lot of overlap, we want to definitely be careful with how the way we build this lineup, and fitting Drew Timme and Jordan Minor and another high-end pay-up might end up being somewhat risky. Not impossible, you can definitely do it, but after last night, we know that there's risk involved with some of these low to mid majors. My decision is clearly going to be Jordan Minor over Drew Timme once again, especially going up against a St. Mary's team that can get up on him and cause him some difficulties. So that's my plan of attack there with the pay-ups for Merrimack. The starting group that they typically run, let's go ahead and pull that up, their last game against Sacred Heart here in the tournament. Javon Bennett, Jordan Minor, Ziggy Reed, Devon Savage, and Jordan Durkak. The bench pieces are Jordan McCoy and Jalen Stinson. Prices are up, though. Bennett and Reed are both up over 7K. Savage over 5.8. Durkak over 6K. So there's a lot of expensive pieces here. They're at least going to run their starting group into the ground, so we know who's going to be on the floor. But again, stacking isn't going to be an option in this particular game just because of how high priced they are. I want some exposure in the other games here, obviously in the Horizon League Final, the Oral Roberts game. So I'm not going to get all my, stuck into one spot here where I'm stacking this game and then I'm at the mercy of them having a down game like I was with Youngstown State last night. Going to be a little bit reactive there. I know it's not the best way to play, but I am looking at a lot of landmines for this particular slate. So Minor is our guy, if nothing else, coming out of this game. Northern Kentucky versus Cleveland State. This is our Horizon final. Last night, it got really quite weird in that Youngstown State game. They just could not make a shot. And Northern Kentucky, who has all the experience in the world here under Darren Horn, and when they get into this spot, they perform during this time of year, and that win over Youngstown State showed just how dominant they can be. Chris Brandon, we mentioned how good his rebounding ability is. He had 17 rebounds last night against Youngstown, only scored 8 points, but a huge game on the glass for him. Marcus Warwick, who is very scoring reliant, we mentioned that. He did it last night, 22 real points. Only 1 rebound, nothing else. Sam Vincent had 17 and 6. Xavier Rhodes had 12 points, 3 steals. Trevin Falker came off the bench, had 9 points and a rebound. Not quite the game you would like at 4-8, but definitely with 20-plus minutes, he is somewhat valuable whenever he's under that price of 5K. On the Cleveland State side, they were never in risk there against Milwaukee. They were controlling it throughout, and that was with Tristan Enaruna in serious foul trouble. Just like in the Youngstown State game with Adrian Nelson, our two key pieces there, Enaruna and Nelson, saddled with fouls all night, but still put up great scores. Enaruna, 24 points, 8 rebounds, and an assist, despite seeing only 25 minutes because of the fouls. His fantasy point per minute number continues to exceed even my expectations, which are super high for him, and he's just been phenomenal. Deshaun Parker had a great game, 9 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists. Deontay Johnson had a great game, 14 and 10 with 4 blocks. He avoided the foul trouble. Drew Lauder didn't have a very good game because of his fouls, but that allowed Yahel Hill to come in and play 28 minutes, 11 points, and a rebound, 2 steals. He paid off his sub 4K price point. Defensively, Cleveland State, they got up on them and then they let off a little bit. BJ Freeman had his 19 real points. Jalen Johnson had 24. Several other players had 8 to 10 points. So Cleveland State's defense will have to stay engaged throughout here against this Northern Kentucky team, because if they have any lapses at all, they will get punished a great deal. And if you watched those games last night, hopefully you did, you'll see where these points are going to come from. Sam Vinson, Marquise Warwick. So those are the two they have to really hone in on. Warwick is sitting there at 8K. He's fine. Again, we know how scoring reliant he is, so I'm not personally looking there. I do think Vincent has a lot of upside and viability at 6'9" for GPPs. Same with Chris Brandon at 7'2", although he's going to rely on his peripherals. Vincent's going to rely a little bit more on his scoring, and Warwick all the way on his scoring. Xavier Rhodes at 5'2" is cheap enough, but if he's not getting a bunch of steals, I don't think he's really all that valuable, to be honest. It really comes down to, I guess, if you want to use this value piece at 4-5, which is Trey Robinson. He played 30 minutes last night, 7 points, 4 rebounds, an assist, 2 blocks, and a steal. He has been playing pretty well coming into the tournament here, and he's also been seeing an influx of minutes at the expense of Trevon Faulkner to end the season. So 4 of his last 5 games, over 20 minutes. He scored 16 plus fantasy points in 4 of those 5 games as well. He will not be the focus of the better defenders on Cleveland State, so there is some definite, interest for me on him as a main team option because of that. On the Cleveland State side, I want to go right back to Enaruna. He's only 8.3. I still think he's very, very cheap. Considering how high his fantasy point per minute total is, considering how great he was in a short amount of minutes there. Could fouls potentially happen? Oh, of course. Fouls are always part of the game. We never know when that's going to happen, but assuming he stays on the floor and doesn't get into foul trouble this go around, it's going to play 35 to 40 minutes. Now, he only had 28 fantasy points against Northern Kentucky last time they played, and it was a 64-63 victory for them. It was down to the wire type game. And the first time he played against them, he took, 9 shots and got to the foul line 12 times, only made 5. So that hurt him, but he hit 30 fantasy points despite the fact that he shot terribly at the charity stripe and didn't contribute as much peripherals as we're seeing him do now. So I like Enaruna at 8.3. I think people will look him off, even though he's been so popular, because of his mediocre for him, I guess, against NKU performances of 28 to 30, which he's cheap enough at 8.3 to take a 30-32 and still have plenty of upside for the rest of your lineup to cash at minimum. If he was like 9K, 10K, then obviously it would be a much bigger decision. But I do think the fact that people are going to go straight to Timmy means that Enaruna is going to drop significantly in ownership tonight compared to last night. So I'm right back on the Enaruna train. I'm right back on the Tay Williams train. With Enaruna in foul trouble, Tay stepped up. He took 16 shots yesterday, got to the foul line, took 4 for 6 from the line, 18 real points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks for 36 fantasy points. You look at 3 of his last 4, he has eclipsed 36 fantasy points in those 3 of 4 games. So he is playing fantastic. Guard forward eligibility, which just gives you that flexibility to put him where you need. I'm going right back to the mini Cleveland State stack with those 2 in my main lineup, and I don't regret it one bit. Now, one thing we saw yesterday was Deshaun Parker, too. People hit him. He had a real nice game, 32 fantasy points. That was the one I missed on because I did go Adrian Nelson, who didn't have as big a game as I was hoping. And for a little bit less, you got Parker in there for 6'3" and 32. So he has scored 30-plus in 3 of his last 4, obviously going to be on the floor for 30-plus. But if I expect Enaruna to not be in foul trouble or to be on the floor for 30-plus, the shot attempts that Parker had, which were 9, those thus dip back down to his usual 4 to 6. and then he becomes less of a play because he's not going to score that much. You look at it, he's not a big-time scorer. He's not going to rebound as much with Enaruna on the floor. He's going to be grabbing those boards, or Drew Lauder's going to be grabbing those boards, and basically Parker's going to end up being the assist man, and he's going to have to put up a ton of assists to really still pay off this price of 6.5. So I'm not chasing that performance. However, if it goes down like it did last night with fouls, then his shot attempts will go up, and then it'll be a bad fade at the end of the day. But right now, I do think he is the fade of the group. Drew Lauder is the fade of the group, of course. He's a GPP only because of how risky he is, but his price has gone down to 6.4. And then we saw Deontay Johnson really, the last 2 games, hasn't been in foul trouble, so knock on wood, and he's played massive minutes. The extra period game there against Robert Morris, 42 minutes. Last night, he played 37. He is playing a ton, and he's only 6K. He's going to go overlooked as well. He's a very strong leverage GPP type of play in that range that people just aren't going to look. And Yahel Hill is still 3.8K. Sub 4K was 3.5 last night, put up that 15 to 16 fantasy points. He's going to play around 25 minutes guaranteed. Taking, last night he actually took fewer shots than usual. He's just super efficient, but you saw the prior 2 games, he took double-digit shots. So Hill at 3.8 is very much still in play and alive as a value option that can be used in your main lineup or otherwise. All right, we're moving on here. We're going to remain efficient. Charleston is going to be taking on UNC Wilmington here in the CAA tournament. Crazy that Wilmington got the job done against Hofstra. Hofstra was the team that I think most expected to come out of there, and it was a 79-73 tournament loss for Hofstra Pride and the Seahawks of UNC Wilmington, who are 24-9. Very, very good season for them. Big win over Hofstra. Now they get Charleston tonight. Tournament season on the line. It's going to be a really a good game, I think. I think that the pressure is not on Wilmington. Clearly, the pressure is going to be all on Charleston, who was ranked at points this year. This is the final. If they lose to Wilmington, I don't know that they have enough juice to get the auto bid, honestly. They do have a net ranking, I believe, of 52, 51, somewhere in there. So that, technically, if we're going straight off of net, they should get in. But we know how the committee is. There's so many factors that go into net that most people don't even know. But they don't have any quad 1 wins. And they have 0 wins against projected NCAA teams. And they have 3 quad 3 losses. I did a little bit of homework here before the show just to kind of play this angle here. I think Charleston is going to have a lot of nerves. And this is they're going to be playing very stiff. And we know that the teams in these tournaments that has nothing to lose and they're able to play loose end up being the most dangerous. So I do think Wilmington is a phenomenal team to target tonight. I think they're a phenomenal team to bet for. I think there's going to be some prop opportunities. And I think price-wise, we're looking at some pretty solid options overall here that we can look at for this Wilmington squad. First, let's pull up the starting lineup that they used against Hofstra last night. Donovan Newby, Malik Harden-Hayes, Trezarian White, Amari Kelly, and Shaquem Phillips. All of them played over 30 minutes, with multiple playing 40 or more because of the overtime. Bench-wise, Nick Farrar and Jamari Thomas, but this is a team in Wilmington that's clearly going to rely heavily on their starting group. So that means we have some guys we can really look at. Shaquem Phillips at 6'3", Malik Harden-Hayes is 5'6", Amari Kelly's only 4'3", Trezarian White 6'4", and then Donovan Newby at 5'7". Rates-wise, here's what we're going to highlight. Trezarian White, 27% usage rate, 25% shot rate. He does have a defensive rebounding rate of 18%. He's drawing 6 fouls per 40, which is top 50 in the country. Shaquem Phillips, 3.5% steal rate, 25% shot rate, 23% usage rate. So there's some upside there. Malik Harden-Hayes, a 39 to 40% three-point shooter, a very good free throw shooter. That's where his game is going to come into play. Amari Kelly, an amazing offensive rebounding rate, over 11%, shooting 36% on his three-pointers, but just a very low total, under 20 attempts, 5% block rate. Pretty interesting for him if he can get some minutes here. He does have a foul rate over 5.5 per 40, so there's risk. Donovan Newby shooting 38% from long range. We did see off the bench Jamari Thomas for just 12 minutes, and then against Drexel 17. He was starting most of the season before the tournament started, and he actually has one of the highest usage rates on the team. So it is kind of interesting that his minutes have gone down here recently. I think he could be at 3-7, one of those, you roll the dice in one of your large field alt plays. You see a couple games back, he put up 40 on 14 attempts. He can get hot in a hurry, but the minutes just haven't been there. But at 3-7, he's worth a shot, I think, not in your main, but overall in some of your other lineups. 6-4 is an affordable, reasonable price for Tra White. I like it a lot. I think he's somebody that I absolutely want to have in my main lineup if I can fit him in. Knowing where my priorities stand between Minor and Enaruna. And then, of course, there's some Oral Roberts guys that we might want to try to get to. It might make it difficult, but at this moment in time, I do have White in my player pool, and he's currently, on his way ascending into my main build, scheduled for landing here approximately, 3:30, 4 p.m. PST today. And then the big decision would be Mari Kelly, because I'm thinking we'll see a lot of just mindless, like, well, he's 4-3, he's starting, he played 31 minutes last game, he put up 23, yes, click him in. There's obviously going to be some risk there at 4-3. He's at least high enough to where you can get away from him, and he's high enough to where if he completely fails and puts up 1x, it can hurt your lineup. If he would have been 3-3 or 3-5, then it's just like, well, we're just going to follow the crowd and play him. If he gets into that early foul trouble, he's just, it's dead. At 4-3, you can still do a lot of damage to your lineup. Looking at his past game against Charleston back on February 8th, he had 8 rebounds in 17 minutes, 4 points, 13.5 fantasy points. Not the best game in the world that you want to look for there. Not a killer game if he puts that up. And then the first time against Charleston, he played 19 minutes. He did foul out of that one, but he had 13 points, 2 rebounds. Oh, I apologize. He did foul out of it, but he had a block and a steal. He had 19 fantasy points, but he was able to stay on the court for 19 to 20 minutes prior to fouling out. So he did show a 20 fantasy point game here. So just depends on how you think he's going to perform in terms of, will he get a bad whistle? Will he be handsy? Will he, be disciplined? There's risk there, but he is cheap enough to definitely take that shot. Coming out of this one for Wilmington, I have a lot of desire for Tra White, and I think I'm going to have a lot of exposure to him overall. On the Charleston side, this is a team when they were getting their flowers from the various media outlets and they're ranked and people talking about them, I really wasn't that impressed with them. I mean, they're 30-3, so they do have a top 70 offense, top 75 defense in terms of efficiency. They got beat by North Carolina. They lost to Hofstra and Drexel back-to-back in late January. But they've gone back to business and been crushing. And when they played Wilmington last at the TD Arena, which is the their home court, they won 93-61. It wasn't even a contest. Wilmington just got completely slapped around. So the problem here, though, is that Charleston runs this rotation that is so Leonard Hamilton-esque. And if you know what that means, Leonard Hamilton at his peak for Florida State when they were good, which was only a couple years ago, he would run 10 to 12 guys. He would seemingly, when you thought you had it figured out with our boy Mifiondo Kabengele, wish he was still around. He's not dead or anything, but he's in the NBA. But just would find guys off the street, walk-ons, just continually, like, how can I make this rotation any deeper? You can't stop me at 12. You can't stop me at 13. I'm running 14 guys in this, and that's all there is to it. And Charleston is just reeks of that. And we're here in a tournament. We're in a tournament game against Towson last night. They win 77-72, but they proceed to play, 9 guys, 10 plus minutes. And I'm sure they would love to play more if they could. This is like a miracle for them to play 9 guys only. So it does hurt their overall upside. It makes them very low-end options for me overall. Now, we have some guys here who are interesting, and I do like, such as Rain Smith, who at 4.8K can definitely get 20 fantasy points, pay that off, and possibly get more. He shot 11 threes last night, hit 4 of them, 20 real points, 2 steals, 2 assists, and a rebound. So he is the one that, if I am going to use a Charleston guy, I'm looking that direction because he gives me a discount And I know that if they are going to run a shorter rotation, which isn't necessarily going to happen, he's going to be one of the main guys that, regardless of that, will see 25 plus minutes and be on the floor. Rates wise, it's also, we want to look at a guy like Ante Bravovich, who has a 32% shot rate, a 29% usage rate, a combined rebounding rate of 35%, and a 3% block rate. He has really impressive rates across the board, sitting there at 6'3". I think, as he's been starting since like mid-December after coming off the bench, been a really productive scorer, has the ability to score at all three levels. In fact, it's just, are we going to see 19 minutes? Or are we going to see 30? He did play 30 against Towson last night. The Stony Brook game was a blowout there in the tournament, so he played 21. You like to think that he's going to see enough minutes here to be warranted at 6'3", but it's not without risk. But his rates are so great, he could still pay off this 6'3" price point in only 22 to 23 minutes. So that is something to keep in mind. He did hang almost 40 on Wilmington in only 22 minutes back on February 8th. So he had that history. And then in 21 minutes against them back in January, he had 24. So Ante is definitely not a confusing piece, but a really intriguing piece that I want to pull the trigger on, but I certainly do not want to have too many Charleston pieces. And if I need the value from Rain Smith, that automatically for me dismisses Bravovich away from my main lineup, because I can only handle one Charleston guy in my main. There's just too much risk for me in terms of upside being reduced with them running 8 or 9 guys here. I don't like it. So that is the rundown on Charleston. You can also look at, Jalen Scott's 5K. That's fine. Pat Robinson's 5'1", but they're just very low-level options even at that price point. All right, Oral Roberts. Who wants Oral Roberts to make a run? By the way, Liberty lost to Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State just 2 to 3 short years ago, only 2 to 3 wins. Now they knock off the mighty Liberty and Darius McThree, who may not dance now, right? They're NIT bound. So Oral Roberts, huge favorite to walk away with this dub and the Summit League crown, but they may not. There is a lot of crazy, wacky stuff that could happen here. You probably by now are familiar with Mad Max Asmus, not Abmus, not Amos, not Abibimus. It's Asmus, spelled differently, but that's how you say it. We learned that 2 years ago when they made their run, in the tournament. That great game against Arkansas, man, that was a classic. Mad Max is just a phenomenal player. His NBA stock was so high after that tournament run where they beat Ohio State and Florida. Maybe I'm glad he came back, but probably hurt himself a little bit. Kevin O'Banner, of course, goes to Texas Tech and leaves Max on his own. And they have a fairly decent season last year without Kevin, but it was 19-12. They didn't go to the postseason, which really hurt them. This year they get back on track. They're 29-4. They have the nation's longest active winning streak at 16 games. They haven't lost since January 9th, which was against, at the time, a very good New Mexico team. That loss not looking quite as good now. And their other losses are against St. Mary's, Houston, and Utah State, all teams that are likely going to dance. Utah State, maybe not. We'll see. But Asmus, 27% usage rate, 27% shot rate, has a really high 8th best free throw shot making rate in the country, 39% from long range. He's drawing 5 fouls per 40. Like, you got to know he's fearless. It's March. This is max time. He's going to put up a big number regardless. He's going to absolutely dominate regardless of the opponent. But they're not giving us a break at any means. He's 9-4, so we're going to have some decisions to make here. But he's an absolute great player to have, because if the game is close at all, he's going to play the entire way. And we saw that last night with his 40 minutes, scored about 37. Now, he hasn't been hitting the top end as much in the last 3 to 4 games, but he did against NDSU back on just February 18th, not that long ago, hang 27 real points and 43 fantasy points on them. So there is a lot to like for him in this matchup. The first time against NDSU back on the 19th of January, he also scored 40 plus fantasy points. So they have no answer for him. They can't stop him. theoretically speaking, he should absolutely dominate here and we should prioritize him. But there's Minor, there's Enaruna, there's Timmy. There is a lot of tough choices you're going to have to make in your main lineup today. But Asmus is a guy that we have to absolutely consider and we have to utilize somewhere, some way. What's up, Alex? On the secondary playlist here, you have Connor Vanover at 7-9, who didn't quite work out in the SEC level. He's working out quite well here for Oral Roberts, been able to fill that O'Banner role because Vanover does similar things to him. He can rebound and he can hit threes. And being a big that can do that, that is why Oral's been so much better this year, because they have that piece to replace KO, and it's worked out quite well. Where Vanover has struggled and why he had to transfer out of the SEC is because he just couldn't – he's not fast enough to guard guys. As much as he can step out and hit threes, he is not able to guard guys who can. And if he gets into a pick and roll situation, his pick and roll defense was just atrocious. But he's playing so well in other aspects of the game that obviously the Golden Eagles have to play him. And you saw last night, he was a freaking monster. 50 fantasy points, 17 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 blocks, 3 steals. Those kind of stocks numbers are truly appealing. Now, he only had 25 against NDSU last time out. That was the Max Asmus show. And he had 26 against them the first time. So he hasn't hit that high number against them quite as much. I actually feel like we'll see higher ownership on Vanover at that range than obviously Enaruna and Minor, but maybe even more than his own teammate Asmus if people, look at what he did last night and just he fits into their lineups a little bit more. So I do feel like Vanover is at least an interesting fade because I'm not so sure we're going to see an upside game from him here. This just screams Mad Max all day. Now, secondary options, you have Isaac McBride, Carlos Jurgens, Kareem Thompson. These are all guys with tournament experience. At least Jurgens and Thompson are with tournament experience. Deshang Weaver has been a guy that is a reliable scorer for them, and I thought would take another step this year. But he hasn't seen the minutes, and he just hasn't really played well at all. So we can't really look at him. We just want to focus on the Jurgens, Thompson, McBride, Vanover, and Asmus group. Now, Isaac McBride, he came over originally from Vanderbilt 2 years ago, so he didn't have that tournament experience there, but he's been a key piece for them, playing heavy minutes. You saw last night, 38 minutes. He's been over the 30-minute mark in every single game except one since February 4th. So he's going to be on the floor doing his thing. He's a reasonable price at 6.5 to where I think GPP-wise, he's kind of a sneakier option because people are going to gravitate towards the slightly cheaper options, or they're going to go up to a Vanover or a Mad Max. Carlos Jurgens at 5.7. I don't know what it is about Jurgens, but over the course of 2 to 3 seasons here, whenever he has appeared on a DFS slate, he has just been really, really good. I didn't have time to go back and pull last year's numbers or the year before, but there in the tournaments, even he had like 5K. He was putting up 5 to 6X type of numbers. So he's just a very solid contributor, and he's taken a lot more shots this year, and he's focusing on his offense a lot. He's always been a solid contributor in those secondary categories, such as rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, that kind of thing. He's definitely got value there, but the fact that he's taking double-digit shots now and he's contributing on that side of the ball, he's really become valuable. I think he's an excellent play in all formats, maybe not so much a large field tournament, but you could use him in high dollar single entry and cash games at 5.7 and have him return 23 to 25 fantasy points and possibly even hit more. And then Kareem Thompson at 6.2. Thompson is the known gunner, shoots almost 40% from long range. His shot rate hasn't been quite as high as you might think, but he's definitely out there to spark the offense when they need it, or be a kick-out option. He's also been rebounding really, really well. 3 of his last 4 games, he's been over 6 rebounds. He's also scored 27-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. Really nice outings for him. He's just a very solid option through and through as well. So in Oral Roberts mini stack, certainly feels pretty good. If you can't get to max, and I understand if you can't, you can fit in 2 of his teammates for under 8K and feel pretty good about it. On the North Dakota State side, nobody thought they'd be here. Wins over South Dakota State. They have a really horrific defense. They are not forcing any turnovers. Teams basically can do whatever they want against them. Though oddly enough, they are one of the best defensive rebounding teams in the country. But that's pretty much the only thing that they're going to do. Now, they have a kid by the name of Grant Nelson who is a bit of a unicorn. He is grown each year. He's up to 7 feet, 7 feet now. He's packed on 30, 40 pounds. But as he's done that, it hasn't been a situation where he's become just like a back to the basket type player. He's able to hit threes. He has really nice driving moves. He can dribble a little bit. He's actually a pretty nice player. If you have an opportunity today to go back and look at some Grant Nelson highlights, I think you'll find yourself quite entertained. Number 1 usage rate in the Summit League, 3rd highest shot rate, number 1 defensive rebounding rate, 9th best offensive rebounding rate, 11th best assist rate, 4th best block rate, 13th best steal rate, 3rd most fouls drawn per 40, and he is shooting 63% from the field in conference game, which is the 3rd best. That's on 2-point field goals, not including his threes. You include the threes or you just look at the threes by themselves. He's shooting 33% from distance, playing the 11th most minutes in the Summit. So he's going to play all the minutes in the world. He is a phenomenal player to watch. He's only 8-1. The price is just silly price on him. He should be priced at 10K. So you might not even get to max. And at this point, you're probably wondering and questioning yourself if you should play Drew Timme. Now, I'm back on the Drew Timme fade like I was last night because I'm a low major, mid major guy. Whenever they're on the slates, I'm all about it. So I'm looking at how can I fit minor? How can I get Enaruna? I'd love to get max. How do I get Nelson? Because Nelson at 8-1 is just a hilariously bad price. It makes literally no sense for him to be that way. And DK did such a nice job on the first 2 mid-major games of pricing guys up, and then they come in here and they just fell flat on it. I don't know. So expect high ownership on him for people that are, have any clue at all what they're doing. And because of the fact that game logs exist, they'll be able to go back and look at the fact that he had 22 rebounds in their last game. That'll be enough to sell on most people. Now, when they faced Oral Roberts back in February, he had a 30% usage rate, 19 shots, 24 points, 12 rebounds, 3 steals, and a block. We would love that at 8-1. Love it. The first time against Oral Roberts, he took 17 shots, 33% usage rate, 21 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block, 1 steal. Not quite as exciting, but he's still only 8-1, so that stat line is acceptable. And he can pay this price off. I think it's just stupid. It's a really annoying price. I'm not happy about it, but you know what? We got to just roll with it and expect a lot of overlap today because of the Grant Nelson price. We need Enaruna to come through tonight and not foul because I think Enaruna is going to be our guy. He's going to be our horse like the other Nelson was last night. Other options, or let me actually give you guys the starting 5 here so you know where we stand. In addition to Grant Nelson, it's Bowden Skunberg, okay, Damari Wheeler-Thomas, Tajavius Miller, and Andrew Morgan. Off the bench, we're looking at Joshua Street and Jakari White. So a relatively short rotation. We're looking at 3 to 4 starters playing over 29 minutes, guaranteed. Nelson and Skunberg are going to play majority of the time. Skunberg had a nice game last night himself, hit 4 triples, 24 points, 4 rebounds, couple of assists. He is only priced at 5-4, so he is also in play and in strong consideration for your main lineup. He has scored 30-plus fantasy points in 4 straight, playing extremely well. He had 26 against Oral Roberts last time they played, and 24 in their first meeting. At 5-4, both of those scores are acceptable. He should be up over 6K, probably over 7K, really, really easily. So those guys have popularity and high rostership written all over them. Some pivots would be the 4-7 to Tajavius Miller or the 4K Wheeler-Thomas, who we know of Wheeler-Thomas. He played 37 minutes yesterday, is going to be on the floor for a long time, 3 straight games, over 30 minutes. His fantasy point per minute number is pretty low. Last night may have been a bit of an anomaly, scoring 33 fantasy points, but at 4K, we don't need him to score 33. I do think he can put up 15 to 20 here and he's an interesting pivot at the very least because he's going to be on the court, and anybody at 4K going to be on the court for that length of time has to be considered in all formats. Miller at 4.7 has a little bit more of a high floor, but the upside's not really there for him. But those are some pivot options if you wish. Andrew Morgan is probably the worst play of the group. All right, we move on to the final game here, Gonzaga and St. Mary's. I basically got away from having too much of that at that game. I really was heavy on the horizon. Timmy against San Francisco predictably had a nice game, but didn't necessarily pay off to 10-1 as we predicted. He had the 17, 8, and 5, which is a really good stat line, but 37 fantasy points isn't going to pay the bills at 10-1 when we have guys at 8K putting up 40 to 50. That's going to be the case yet again for me tonight against St. Mary's. Just being physical with Drew Timme is something I harped on yesterday morning, and San Fran actually did a very good job with their rotating bigs of doing so. And I think we see Timme put up another, he's not going to bust by any means. He's just not going to break the slate. And we can't afford to invest 10-1 in him when we have all these other great mid-range, mid-major level high-end guys that are mispriced by 2 to 3K. Now, Timme had 19 and 6 with 4 fouls in 30 minutes against St. Mary's last time. That did result in a win because Antoine Watson, who played fantastic last night, by the way, really had a great game, 17 and 8, 4 steals and a block. He played really well against St. Mary's. He was one of the primary reasons that they won, a couple of late Malachi Smith shots. And then the overtime loss on St. Mary's floor, Timme had 23 points, 5 rebounds, and a block. So he scored more there, but they're still doing a good job of keeping him off the glass, and he's not contributing quite as much as you'd like to see at this price. So for me, he's an easy fade. I think that normal, none of us are normal. I think that grinders and people that are playing CBB on a daily basis are going to know not to play Timme, but we're going to have some casual players. We're going to have some people who are it's Gonzaga St. Mary's. It's the game of the slate. It's the game of the day. Like, a lot of people are going to want to watch it on TV. People like to stack guys that are on, TV because of that reason. So the fact of the matter is Timme should still see some ownership. I hope. So it's a fade to me. Julian Strother at 7.7, who I like, is a fade to me. Rasir Bolton, I think, is fine at 5.5 because he's a reasonable price, but still, these Gonzaga guys are just very, very low end because I don't like the matchup. I don't like their prices, and I just think that the other games are far better environments overall for expected fantasy production. Now, if you just can't handle fading this game, then you want to look to the St. Mary's side. St. Mary's has some definitive options we can look at here. They had a nice, they had a test from BYU last night, but they played well. And Logan Johnson didn't shoot very well, 3 for 11 from the field. He had a pretty rough game, and they still were able to come out on top. Aiden Mahaney hit shots when he needed to, and they had a nice breakout game for Alex Dukas, who is kind of the unsung hero of this team. Kyle Bowen didn't do much. Mitchell Saxon didn't do much. Like, overall, it was a pretty weird game for St. Mary's, but they were able to gut it out, which just shows you this is a very well-coached program. You just can't sleep on them. You look at their roster and nothing will strike fear in your heart, but the way that Randy Bennett has them playing, they are just a phenomenal team. So I think that 8.2 price of Logan Johnson automatically dismisses him from any main team conversation for me. There's just too many other 8K guys that are going to put up a higher score or have the potential to do it, right? I'm not a soothsayer, so I can't tell you for sure. But they're 9 times out of 10, he's not going to score as much as the Minor and Aruna, Nelson, Max group. That's just how it is. But he's got to be a nice little large field leverage play if the rest of the field's off or they're going to the mid-major guys as well. Logan Johnson on the 10th time, the 10% of the time that he does have the best game ever and scores 50, you could win a tournament with him. I don't necessarily like the idea of chasing Alex Dukas at almost 7K, but he's going to play 38 to 40 minutes, so he's on the floor. Aiden Mahaney at 6.6 is a little bit too high for me. It's going to take a ton of threes. If he gets hot, he can pay that off. And then the decision on the bigs. Mitchell Saxon's too expensive at 7.5. He's dismissed from the player pool for me. I think Kyle Bowen is where we would look there at 6-2. And I know Bowen didn't have the greatest game yesterday, but you know, we're not going to penalize him for that. Overall, he's been an important part of this team, and he still played 37 minutes, even though he didn't play great. And I did mention yesterday him being one of the more viable options because his price, even though when you look at his logs, he hasn't been hitting that 20 plus mark very often. However, last time they played Gonzaga on the 4th, he did hit 24 fantasy points, and he was a major problem on the glass for them. He had 10 rebounds, and he was absolutely dominant on the glass, had a couple of steals. He was a menace, an absolute menace in that game. They ended up losing, but Bowen was giving them nightmares. So I think he's an okay option, but clearly this game is not a priority for me. It will never be a priority for me when these two meet up, and I think that we can get away from it fully on both sides. And if the Horizon game ends up a bust, you just kind of chalk it up and say whatever, because you're getting your money in with the best of it on this slate. If you go for the Cleveland State, Mary Mac, Charleston, Oral Roberts, like those games are clearly just way better fantasy environments than Gonzaga St. Mary's. Gonzaga is going to be a nice one to watch in real life and possibly even bet, but DFS wise, no. All right, so core play number 1, Tristan Enaruna. I don't give a damn. He has got such an amazing fantasy point per minute. I hope that everybody fades him. The guy gets into foul trouble and still flirts with 40. Yes, sign me up every time. He's going to absolutely blow the doors off of this slate. Love him, all in. I think that the silly price of 8-1 means Grant Nelson is a no-brainer core play, so we will core him as well, just like the rest of the universe will. Just 2K too cheap. He should be the 110-1, and Drew Timme should be the 1-8-1. That's a fact. And I really want to core Jordan Minor, but then I give you 3 pay-ups, and it's like, what do you do with that, right? Because maybe you can't fit him. You need to try, but maybe you can't. So the third member of the core, let's go with a cheaper option. There are several we can look at, but I think it probably makes the most sense to either take that risk on Amari Kelly at 4-3 or just plug Joe Moondon in at 4-1, and probably even play both. And it may come down to that, sticking those guys in, maybe a little Trey Robinson, and then seeing if you can make the quartet of Mad Max, A. Smith, Minor, Enaruna, and Nelson work. If those 4 guys can get into your lineup without sacrificing so much, I think you're looking at a really strong group. It's probably not possible. Let's see if we can make it happen. It's not looking promising. 3.8. So if I plug A. Smith, Minor, Enaruna, and Nelson, and I have 15.3 left, 3.8. Now we have, let's see. Can we do it? Can we do this? We have Yahil Hill at 3.8, but that doesn't get us below where we need. That's going to be tough. I think Max, if you have to drop somebody out of that group, I think it becomes Max. I'm more willing to drop Max than I am Minor, and I might be wrong about that, but this Mary Mac team is just, they're playing pissed, and Minor is just going to go out on top. So I feel a little bit better about him. Let's see. Marshallonis. No, we need somebody at 3K to take a shot on, man. That's what we need. Yeah, it's pretty tough down here unless you want to go Hunter Salas at 3.5, and he's not even giving us enough at 3.5 to find anything. So yeah, that's probably not going to work. GPP lineup, I might try to throw that in there and hope those 4 can combine for like 200. But at this point, I am running with Minor, Enaruna, and Nelson in my main lineup. So full disclosure there, all 3 forwards. But I'm confident in that group. All right, let's wrap up here because I have to go. Where's my PrizePicks tab? Okay. PrizePicks. There's going to be some interesting PrizePicks stuff here. We've been having some decent success here. I love the Justin Mutz 32.5 fantasy point prop going over that against Notre Dame. Absolutely love it. I think he's going to smash against them. So that's the PrizePicks option play number 1. Going right back to Tristan Enaruna over 29.5 fantasy points. You guys know how I feel about him. Dude plays 25 minutes and still hammers the slate. Yes, I'm just going to keep playing him until further notice. And then the one that I love, Northern Arizona. How about Northern Arizona, huh? They are in it to win it for the Big Sky Conference tournament. They pull off the huge win over Eastern Washington on Sunday by 1. Huge. I mean, they beat Idaho and they probably shouldn't have, and they beat Eastern Washington, knocking them to the NIT. Jalen Cone, old friend Jalen Cone of Virginia Tech fame. Remember how he used to just play 30 minutes and put up 2 for us? Well, he has grown up. He is a fantastic scorer, contributor across the board. He plays in a backcourt with Xavier Fuller, who is a South Dakota transfer. And this Northern Arizona team, despite being 11-22, has the type of guard play that can pop you right in the mouth, and that's exactly what they did against Eastern Washington. Cone didn't even have that great of a game. He had like 11. It was a really balanced effort. Nick Maines and Xavier Fuller both had 15-plus points too, so it wasn't even that great. But I'm looking right at Jalen Cone's fantasy prop here of 25.5, and I love what I see here, taking the over for him. His rates are strong, 29% shot rate, 27% usage rate. He's shooting 43% from long range in conference games. He has just been a phenomenal scorer. You know, it's really weird because Eastern Washington did a nice job on him, but the prior 3 games, he scored 25-plus real points without batting an eye against Northern Colorado, Weber State, and Idaho. So he is looking at a normal performance of 30-plus fantasy points with 24-plus real points. Pretty much, nearly a lock. So going up against Montana here, this will be a strong little performance, I think, for Jalen Cone. I'm going to take his over 25.5 fantasy points and run with it. We'll try to put some more in there, but right now those are what I'm rolling with. Tomorrow morning, actually, we'll be back 10 a.m., maybe a little bit after PST, and then Thursday night and Friday night, 9 p.m. PST. Thanks for hanging out. We got it done in an hour. Speed, it can be done. We got it done. We sped through. Appreciate you guys who continue to support the show, and I will see you tomorrow morning for another edition of the CBB Super Show. See you.